10 Minutes to Joy is your weekly invitation to reset, recharge, and rediscover your most joyful self through aha moments and simple energy techniques. You're listening to holistic psychotherapist Sylvia Plester-Silk. I've worked with individuals, couples, and groups from parole officer to private practice. I've learned many lessons, and I'm ready to share. Today, we are talking about National Truth and Reconciliation Day, which happens in Canada on September 30th every year. I am struck by how our forefathers have attempted to find joy by extinguishing joy of our First Nations peoples. Doing a little research again today just to freshen up my memory. Did you know that the last residential school in Canada closed in 1997 in the province of Saskatchewan? That shocks me. Even when I was in university, we didn't talk about it. It's like it didn't exist. And I went to Ryerson. And we all know that Ryerson was renamed because we wanted to whitewash the fact that Ryerson played an active role in creating and establishing the rules and how exactly the residential schools would happen. I don't think most of us truly appreciate the devastation that's happened. Today, I sit and I wear my Every Child Matters t-shirt as a symbol of my acknowledgement of what has happened to our Indigenous peoples over the years. During a recent visit to the Yukon, I was shocked and appalled by how little space in the museums was actually given to Indigenous peoples. It seemed to me a lot about all of the people that came in to grab the gold in the gold rush, and how wonderful these white people that built these huge buildings because they were moneyed people were. In fact, I noticed in one museum, and I'm sorry I can't remember which one it was to name it right at this moment, there was one small plaque that talked about the residential schools. Other than that, there were some artifacts of different clothing and that sort of thing. But certainly in 2025, you would think that we would have some more appreciation. It's been 10 years since the Truth and Reconciliation report was published. In that report, there were 94 calls to action. The reports today suggest somewhere between 13 to 15 of those action steps have been completed, and there's even disagreement whether that's happened. And perhaps 39 are in progress. Folks, this is 10 years later we're talking. We haven't even made it halfway. I find this appalling. When I was in the Northwest Territories and speaking with my Airbnb host, she talked about how one of the local groups of Indigenous people, and I apologize if I'm saying this incorrectly, had gotten self-governance supported by the federal government. And I think that's wonderful. They're starting to be able to reestablish and find their voices, their culture, and to celebrate their culture. We have all sorts of multicultural days and so on that happens. How much are we actually celebrating the Indigenous folks? This summer, in what's known as the town of Sable Beach, Saugeen Beach sign was erected. I thought it was fabulous. However, on one Facebook group that I'm part of, one of the individuals said, "What else are they going to steal from us?" I was appalled. How can we possibly suggest that our Indigenous folks are stealing from us? We tried to destroy their culture. We tried to eradicate. The residential schools were to take the Indian out of the child. These children were returned to their homes during school breaks to virtual strangers who they were afraid to trust. They were afraid to participate in their culture because they would be punished if they spoke the language. I've heard of personal stories of people being locked in closets in the residential schools because they chose to sing. It is time, folks, to get, well, I can't use that expression, but it's time to actually educate ourselves, to really understand what really truly happened in Canada and how even today we're whitewashing it. Are we publishing the atrocities that happened in school books? Is there lessons being taught in a real way? Or do we have a day on September 30th every year that we just say, this is National Truth and Reconciliation Day? I invite you on the 30th of September and every other day of the year to educate yourself. What would it be like for you if you were not allowed to speak your language? What if you were beaten, abused in even more horrific ways, simply because you were part of a group that people no longer wanted? We are outraged by what happened in Nazi Germany, and I just don't see how this is any different. A few years back, we saw how so many bodies were found. Many of them will never be found. We see missing persons. Women of Indigenous backgrounds are murdered. They go disappearing. Do we give that equal weight when it's somebody of a different culture? I don't think we do. So today I invite you to get curious. Set aside what judgments you may have placed and do some research. Read the Truth and Reconciliation Report. Read what's been done or what hasn't been done. Contact your politicians and ask for more action to be taken. Do whatever you can to understand what has truly happened, because it has been hidden in the history of Canada. It is time for the truth to come out. It is time for us to allow all cultures to have joy, including our Indigenous peoples. It is time to celebrate them and to honor them in a way that we never have. So in closing this podcast today, I call on you, listen in, understand what truly happened, and let's be a whole lot more respectful, because we have stolen so much more from our Indigenous people than they could ever attempt to steal from us. And be bloody grateful of the lands that you're standing on and living on today, because they were Indigenous lands before we came and took them over. Yes, this topic hasn't been filled with joy, but may we feel the joy of being able to celebrate our culture, and for the Indigenous to celebrate their culture, to drum, to sing, to tell their stories again, and for their seven generations to totally come alive again and be centered in their truth. And may we honor their truth just as much as we honor our own. Thank you for listening. I'll be back next week on 10 Minutes to Joy.